Okay, so today we are talking to Jonny Wilkinson. Jonny, hi, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Yes, we're really happy you're here. And just before we start the actual interview, I have a kind of a little mini rugby quiz for you. So,
okay. Don't expect me to get any of this correct, by the way.
You're going to do great. It's only one question. Okay. Rugby was invented in 1883 when a boy named William Webb Ellis picked up a soccer ball during a game and did what with it? A, covered it in kisses. B, ran it all the way back. C, threw it at the coach.
What was the second one? B, ran it all the way back?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's your answer. And also, I'm even going to extend my knowledge here. It was 1823, not 1883.
Oh, it was 1823.
Yeah. How about that? I've
Nice.
transcended the entire.
No, that's really good. You will see possibly that, and Scott knows this about me, Numbers and I are not friends. No. So he always double checks any numbers that I give him about anything.
Jonny, I would give you a high five if I could.
1823.
Nice touch.
Yeah.
Yes, William Webb Ellis picked up the soccer ball during a game and ran it all the way back. And the game of rugby was invented at that moment.
Indeed.
So thank you for that correction and the correct answer. I am Laura Cathcart-Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, Hun. So, like I said, we're talking to Jonny Wilkinson. He's also a podcaster. He has a really cool podcast called I Am. It's called I Am, right, Jonny?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
yes,
I am.
Yes. Okay, good. He is particularly known for scoring the winning drop goal in the 2003 Rugby World Cup Final and is widely acknowledged as one of the best rugby union players of all time. This is true because, as I was telling Jonny before we started the interview, I researched a lot, and this was like on every single site that you are that guy. And so I wanted to just start by saying, being American, I know tragically little about rugby. And I was wondering if you could just explain the basics of the game and talk a little bit about how popular it is outside of the States.
Yeah, I've never been asked to do that, funnily enough, to try and explain rugby. I think because when we speak about rugby a lot, we're often asked about the spirit of it, because it's a very interesting game, the sort of game that you go to watch in the crowd, and it doesn't matter which team you're supporting. There's a real level of respect amongst supporters. The players are brutal with each other on the field, but they are immensely, I guess, respectful of each other. And also there's just never an issue between them, no matter what happens on the field. And this is kind of the ethos of it and why I think it's kind of enjoyed. But in terms of the game, how would I sum it up? It's a game where the ball is passed backwards and your aim is to score over the opponent's try line. So to run forwards and pass backwards, you've got two sets of kind of positions. You've got the forwards, which are the big guys, and the backs, which are supposed to be the less big guys, who are turning out to be even bigger than the big guys because of that professionalism which kicked in about 1996. The game turned professional, and since then, it's really intensified, as you can imagine, with people hitting the gym full time. You know, it's really taken off, and it's getting quicker and faster, and it's a hell of a spectacle. But as with all these things in the sports, as you have in the States with your American football and what have you, player safety and all these things is becoming a really big thing. So they're really trying to move towards a new version of the game, which ensures the future of these players, as well as keeps providing that amazing spectacle. But I think that's kind of a reasonable way of summing it up.
No, that's great. That's great. What position were you?
So I was a number 10, which meant I was what they call a fly half or an outside half, who tends to be two things in the game. One is big decision maker. So you are a bit of a bit of a general, bit of a quarterback. In a way, they kind of refer to them as a quarterback in rugby. And the second one is you do tend to do a lot of the kicking. And the kicking, there's a couple of areas of the game where it becomes a very isolated skill, a dead ball skill, where all eyes are on you. And kicking's one of those, a bit like the goal kicker again, in the field goal kicker in American football. Do you know what I mean? It's like all these kind of amazing plays, team versus team, and then all of a sudden, it can flick to just one player.
Interesting. So when you won the World Cup in 2003, you were one of the most recognized people on the planet, which I just want to sit with for a second, because that's insane. And I want to talk about that, but I want to first talk about, because you and I talked a lot about this during our conversation, about the role perfectionism played in you getting there. And because I like to talk about like where that started. You told me you grew up with a lot of fear. And I wanted to know about that fear and what your earliest memory of was of needing to be perfect, and how that perfectionism protected you from the fear.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm constantly evolving in terms of the way I think about this, not because I'm trying in any way, but just because I just find every time I stop to think about it, if I'm pointed that way, I have something different to say about it. And one of those things is, for me, I'm very interested in the spiritual side of things. And often you hear about these people on the spiritual side who, when they're very young, there's something different about them. They kind of, maybe they find themselves hanging around spiritual areas, or they find themselves engaged in very altruistic kind of behaviors, or whatever it be. But for me, in a rugby sense, there was something about me that I took to the game so fully at such a young age, but not just took to it and enjoyed it, but I had a thought process around it, which seemed very strange. I would kick a ball around in my back garden, but immediately the thought would come, I wonder if I can do that on my other foot. So from the age of 4 or 5, I'm starting to practice both feet to try and I'm just so curious and in exploring this, and left hand, right hand, everything. It's just constant kind of this idea about seeing how far I can take it from such a young age. But at the same time as going through all of that, I had an interesting relationship with the unknown, in that I found it, for whatever reason, it was very dark to me, very ominous, very dooming. The world was a largely unsafe place. And my understanding was, at a young, rather immature age, with a bit of sort of basic religious understanding in there, I kind of saw it as my role to be the protector of myself against that dark space. And the best I could come up with in my defense mechanisms against all that fear and anxiety and this horrible sense of unrest and instability, not that I can necessarily pinpoint why I had any of this, was to try and put together the most phenomenal CV. I just felt like that would be my ticket out of there. Everything that they spoke about was inevitable in life, mortality and all these kind of things, and all this failure and all this hurt and all this I didn't even know what doom was. If it was a thing, it would have been easier to deal with. It just felt like the worst thing that was always there. And my sort of ticket that helped me to I guess stave it off was perfectionism. That I would hand this CV to whoever it was on the pearly gates and say, you got to let me in. You've got to give me respite. Right. You've got to allow me to be the one, the only one that beats life in this way. And that,
because look at everything you've accomplished, right?
And
I'm sorry.
No, not at all. But the whole point, I think, of it was that these two things were taking place side by side. One was this immense passion for the game and a gift for it and a desire to explore it and push it as far as I could. But on the other hand, there was this other part telling me that I had to get it all right. I had to succeed. But I also had to be some kind of savior for others. So I had this warrior, savior archetype and this perfectionism mixed with this real love for the game. And that basically played itself out. That's how I'd look back at it. I had so little choice in it.
Yeah.
I practiced for 2-3 hours a day more than anyone else, and anyone else could even think about stomaching. But it was never a problem to me. It just was what I had to do. And therefore, there was, as much as there was this constant drive and dedication, there was also very little space of celebration about a lot of the success that came in there. It was mostly, and I'm sure we'll come to this, it was pretty much a mixture of enjoying the actual doing of it, but the rest was survival. It was just pure survival.
Right. Well, and you told me that you had, I have in my notes that you wrote all these lofty goals for yourself. And that kind of goes with the CV or the resume that you wanted to arrive with in heaven when you died, of like the list of your successes, right? And one of those was win the World Cup when you were a kid. Do you remember writing that? How old were you then?
I was 7, 8 years old. And this was, again, a playing out of those two kind of interesting angles. That passion was leading me. I was drawing pictures just of rugby balls. That's what I used to do. I used to make rugby balls out of cardboard tubes and kick them around when it was dark outside, inside the house, so I could keep playing rugby. I loved it that much. And I wrote down these goals because I loved it. And I thought about how amazing it might be to experience this and to play at the highest level and to be the kicker and to be the captain and to score the most points and to do this and do this. But at the same time, when that list was done, it also became the thing I had to achieve it. It wasn't a kind of, it went from the creativity of that led me to it, then switched to this, but it must be done. And if it's not done, I'm facing that doom again.
Yeah. And then, so that was kind of you as a child going into your teen years. Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
That was, yeah. And then tell me what your life was like leading up to that 2003 World Cup win. Like what did your life look like? Were you super regimented? Were you completely focused on that? Were you still scared?
I was, hugely. Yeah, hugely still dealing with that kind of sense of fear, but on just an ever more maturing level, so that it blended itself in a bit more into daily life. It was no longer this kind of such an obvious, almost childlike cartoon version. It became, suddenly it got its fingers into schoolwork and exams. And it definitely started to manifest itself when I got a bit older into my teens, into this idea about self-worth. You know, what's my self-worth? Where's my self-esteem? Being shy in certain ways, just trying to work out all these challenges that we all go through, but through that stance that was already in place. And that was my kind of thing. I had my talent on the field, which was always kind of the thing I would go to. And because of that, it's where I also hid away a lot. So I wasn't quite so, I guess, proactive in the rest of the stuff that came with those journeys. It was basically get your schoolwork right, play your rugby, and just kind of, mess around a little bit with the other stuff. But if I wasn't on the rugby field, with that fear came a sort of very challenging sense of self-worth. When I was on the field in the middle of it is where I felt deserving. I felt whole and complete when I was in the middle of a game on the field. Everywhere else, I was scrabbling around, definitely. As much as from the outside it might look different, it did feel like that. I love life. I had an amazing upbringing. I had amazing all these things. But I was always, in a sense, looking around at other people thinking, I don't have what they have. But on the rugby field, I was like, this is where, as long as I can stay here, which is pretty much what I did. I just hung out on the rugby field for as long as I could.
Wow.
And so you mentioned leading up
Aussies,
to
the Aussies. Yeah.
I was going to say, you mentioned leading up to the World Cup 2003, and then some amazing things. I think because of that innate inner desire, things started falling into place. I was asked in my school, what do you want to do for a job? And I said, I want to play rugby. They said, well, you're going to struggle then, because that's not a job. And then 2 weeks later, the game went professional. And 2 weeks after that,
wow.
a teacher turned up at our school who just happened to be someone I was a big fan of. He was a professional player who was coming to do some coaching at our school. And his best friend just happened to be my all-time rugby hero at the time. And after, a couple of months of coaching me, he said, look, I'm now moving up north in the country to to work with a professional rugby team. I want you to come with me. And so all these things were unfolding for me beautifully. But I was still, and I ended up playing professionally at that club. Within my first year at age 18, I became, I think, the youngest player for about 70, 80 years to represent the country. And all of a sudden, then I'm part of the international setup, and then I'm part of the bigger setup, and then this, and we're leading towards the World Cup. And it's still that inner journey of struggle versus passion. But on the outside, you could argue it was all going very, very well.
Right. And so you were this young, incredibly talented man who feels that he is worth something while you're in the game, while you're playing, while you're in your element, that's the time where you can feel your worth. And so now you've been kind of catapulted into this arena, maybe literally, where everybody is reflecting that back to you, right? Where you're being revered for your talent in this game. And the expectation, I would imagine, is that off the field, you are as filled up, as sure of your worth off the field as you are on.
Yeah.
So you have this kind of internal struggle going. And that game was against the Aussies, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
That 2003 game. It went into overtime. And then pick it up from there. Tell me what happened when the game went into overtime.
So we had an unbeaten year, 2003. We won everything. We had some big challenges leading up to that. But you're right, kind of I started to thrive off that. I started to see that when I was on the field and the backslapping and the pleasantries and the sense of maybe a sense of feeling a bit more special started to become something. I realized that's how I felt needed or cared for, was to have that kind of thing. So I craved it, this perfectionism. Then it became about not letting people down, all the pressures building and building. We end up with an unbeaten year into the World Cup. We sort of half part struggle stroke find our way to the final as favourites. We end up in a game that we're winning, but then get clawed back to 14 apiece. I think it was at the end of the normal time into extra time. We end up at 17-14, then 17 apiece with only a minute to go. And in the last minute, we find our way from kicking the ball off to being right down their end, and the ball ends up in my hands. And this was something my brother and I, a large part of my family, my dad, my mum, my brother, especially my brother in terms of the rugby stuff, because he was always there playing with me. We'd be running this through the commentary. Oh, and the ball comes to Jonny. He's got 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. He kicks it. Oh, he's done it. All this kind of stuff. And now it's being said about me.
Right.
It's being said about me, and the ball goes through. It's an amazing moment. I think if I'd have actually tried to understand the situation in its physical sense and then still complete that skill, I think I'd have just frozen. I'd have just dropped to the floor and crumbled. But as it was, I had a kind of mini out-of-body experience where I just saw it unfolding. I was kind of very privy to seeing it happen, but I wasn't really doing it. It was a beautiful kind of balance of being there, but also fully embracing it, just effortless.
Mm-hmm.
And then there it is. That's it. Suddenly I've ticked off every one of those goals you mentioned, and I'm 24 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And not only have I ticked off the biggest one of it, but I've ticked it off in the most fairy tale way. I mean, in terms of a life story, you're kind of like, you've done it, and you couldn't have done it in a more emphatically exciting, and whatever you're after from life kind of way. And that's kind of was a very interesting turning point.
So while you were creating these goals for yourself and ticking them off, what did you imagine? How did you think you would feel once you won?
I never explicitly looked or thought about that, but there was definitely an implicit kind of understanding that I would be saved. All of this rubbish, this was going to be the resolution of everything. Because in that still very immature way, I'd set myself a challenge, but I'd almost figured that it wasn't me that had set that challenge. That was my work to be done, and now I'd done it. But I could sense immediately the best moment of it all was actually just before the final whistle went. One of our players smashed the ball off the field, which meant basically the end of the game. And I saw the referee reach to his pocket for his whistle, which meant he was about to blow time. But I wanted to pause it there because you're in that beautiful space of you're on your way, but you've got this knowing that it's coming. And that's become a really interesting space for me since. And it was beautiful. But of course, you can't stop that. It moves on. And very quickly, you go up to the top of the hill. And then you start coming down. Yeah. And the top of the hill is minuscule. You don't get to hang out there for a couple of weeks. It's minuscule. You're there for no time at all. Because even when we're doing a lap of honour around the field, even when they're lifting the trophy, it's like Christmas Eve to Christmas. You wake up on Christmas Day, you're like, whoa, it's Christmas Day. And then all of a sudden there's a feeling that kicks in to be like, oh my God, Christmas Eve was so much better. And I was already down the other side of that hill. We were doing this lap of the field, and I could feel it. I could feel it ebbing away, and I could feel myself reaching for it, thinking, what's happening here? And sure enough, even that night when we're due to go and have our celebrations, and the private function is not so private, there's just tons of people there who have found their way in, and you start to be like, oh God, what's it about? Now you've got your problems are back. And the next morning you wake up in the stark light of day and you're like, I'm still me. I'm still me. And that was my biggest shot. That was everything. I can't do it any better. And my mind is now, again, refusing to take the lesson. And it's saying, well, I tell you, the reason why you don't feel complete is because we need to win another World Cup back to back, because no one's done that. And if you win that next one, then it'll happen. All this kind of ridiculous, just same old kind of behavior, same old feelings, same old reactivity. But I'm looking for any way to just keep being me, even though I'm not enjoying necessarily being me. But as it was, the years went by again.
I was just going to say that thrill of, it's not necessarily a thrill, but the chase of those moments, that's when you could go into warrior mode and prepare, and there's a purpose and a goal, which is really a similar pattern in addiction. I'm not saying that you were addicted to the game, but that's like one of the things in addiction.
I wouldn't put it past me to say that. I'm happy to say that there was definitely a need in it. Definitely.
Yeah. And that the letdown afterwards, that denouement, in my notes that I had that you wrote, you'll be thinking that you'll be happy when you die, like just waiting until then, like so you're confused the next day because you're still feeling grief, right? And that feeling of letdown, and then maybe happiness isn't to be yours in this life, right? Maybe you'll be happy. Yeah. Like I said, when you die. Did I have that right? Is that what you were thinking?
I think a part of that was this savior, sort of sacrificial martyr kind of idea that I had, that I'll take all the suffering whilst all my friends at school were laughing and joking. And I was in that space contemplating the darkness of life, so that they can all be, I even took that into teams. I had this ridiculous story that I'd be the one putting in all the work so that these guys could just have it easy. And of course, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and it was
Right.
damaging in so many ways. But I think what happened immediately after that, and when I say immediately, I mean within 2 weeks, I tried to come back and play my next game for my club professionally.
Yes.
And I broke down. I fractured my neck, which was an old injury that was desperately coming. I was told I may never play again. And for the next 4 years, as a result of this darkness, whether it was mental, emotional, it was all breakdown. And I had 14 different injuries, never the same one, in a row. I barely played a game for 4 years. And just refusal to yield. So I had my neck injury, I had my neck operation. The following day, I was in a neck brace on an exercise bike, pounding away. My brother came in and said, "What are you doing?" And you spoke about addiction. There it is. It couldn't be more damaging.
Mm-hmm.
My body was my vehicle for that sport, and yet I was destroying it. I had no control over what I was doing. But within that injury period, a realization came about, and this is the one you were talking about now, was that I was told you may never play again about 3 times with different injuries. And I thought, what if on the final one, I thought, what if this is it? And someone says, "Oh, well, did you sort of make the most of that career?" I'd look back and think, no, not at all. Not at all. And then I thought, this is going to be the same question I'm going to get, hopefully, in 50, 60 more years at the end of my life. Did you really make the most of being alive? And this idea I was looking at, that there was going to be a payoff coming. At some point, there's going to be a payoff, and that all this stress is worthwhile. All this saying no to this now, because we think there's a better now coming. This was all my truth. That was the sacrifice, the suffering, and everything. And what I found out, what I asked myself was, well, hold on, I've won everything, and it hasn't happened. The next thing's not going to do it. And then I looked at what the narrative around me, all the advertising on TV, all the stuff I was telling myself. It's all based on this payoff, retirement. And then it came to my head that I thought, geez, I'm not even allowing retirement to get me. I'm talking about my legacy.
Right.
So now I'm going to die unfulfilled so that I can be fulfilled by how people remember me. It was a ludicrous idea, and yet I was willing to take that suffering and sacrifice all the way to the grave, just so I didn't have to explore the vulnerability underneath it, that darkness or that challenge.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I guess it triggered this moment to say, not just I need to look at this, but actually I want to do this, and it to include my goals, my performance, my relationships, not to be like a trip to India or the Himalayas to sit on hillsides and almost kind of sign out of of life, but actually to say, but what would performance look like through this? Because I had a lot of experience of that, because I'd been in that zone on the field where you go beyond time and space. You have access to things that it blows you away. And yet I never, ever respected that experience. The voice I listened to was the one in the changing room that was desperately trying to believe away the unknown, that could not have any kind of trust in life. And yet the one on the field had this absolute trust, this absolute sense of it'll happen, and allowing. And I just started to say, well, hold on, I'm going to let that version of me lead me, that now version of me that's happy to say I'm a nobody, I'm a no one, rather than this other version of me that was trying to become a someone and was suffering the hell out of it.
Oh my goodness. And I don't know if I mentioned it this conversation, but I had in my notes that you had said that losing equaled humiliation when you were younger, like to think about losing was to be humiliated. And you also mentioned that after that winning game, you acted humbly, but you like doubled down on hiding, right? how you were feeling in that darkness. And what I just heard you describing was humility.
Yeah.
Right. Which is kind of, I mean, it's the opposite of pride, but it's also the opposite of that fear of humiliation. Right. And
Yeah.
that, and there's that bridge of trust there.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about being humiliated because you're not constantly at the top, whatever that looks like. And to lean into the Jonny that trusted his teammates really honestly with his life, because you guys don't play with a lot of protective equipment from what I saw.
No, definitely not.
No,
I think
right? Hence
that
all the injuries too, I'm sure.
I mean, it's really interesting what you're saying there. It's really, really interesting. I just want to say something about it because it's inspired something in me very big, is that the humiliation and the trust, or the lack of humility and the lack of trust at the beginning, and the change that happened was simply the understanding that the humiliation and the vulnerability was the growth. And what it revealed was that it was always in my gift to define what everything means to me in my life by how I respond. And on the field, that's what I did. I never questioned if this happened. When I was in the zone, I seemed to know that I decided what everything meant in my life, because I decided how I moved my next step, how I took my next step. But when I was off the field, my understanding was everything defines me, and therefore humiliation defines me as this. And humiliation, so all the threats in life, I had to keep them at bay. I couldn't afford to be humiliated because it was the end of me. It was the death of my image, the same way that the death of the physical body. But what I started to realize was I welcomed humiliation because it forced me to dig deep, to find out how I can choose to be who I want to be and how I want to be in this moment, irrespective of or including what's happened to me. And the more humiliation I felt, the more I dug deeper into my ability to respond, and the more of my potential I found, the more of who I am I found.
Right.
So now when the challenges come, the relationship with challenge, the relationship with the unknown, the relationship with vulnerability, and ultimately the relationship with myself, it's become everything. And I don't need a big game to play there. On this podcast, I'll be triggered all the time. Little things about, and I'll be saying thank you to them. Bring them on. Whereas before, if we were doing this podcast 20 years ago, you'd be getting a script from me. I'd have written all the answers.
Right.
I'd have asked you before. I'd have said, please tell me all the questions you're going to ask me. I'd have written all my answers. I'd have practiced them in front of the mirror. I'd have turned up, dressed this way. Just absolute robotic, machine-like conditioning and programming. No receptivity to life or humanity or connection. And thankfully, it's an incredible gift, I think, and one that is by far and away the biggest one I can ever have in my life, is to just suddenly become more aware of that inner opportunity. Because I don't know how it came about necessarily. I just know that with it, I have this sense that every moment is a possibility now.
I love that. And what I heard you say is that you're almost inviting the thing you used to fear the most into your life, which is humiliation, because you don't fear it anymore, because you know that there's lessons there for you in growth. So you're not just enduring your life anymore, getting through to the next goal. You can actually enjoy it, right?
Exactly. There's two states, I think, that I've been speaking about even as a child, is that there's this creative state, which is connected to life and potential. It's language is intuition, inspiration, insight, and incredible imagery. And its emotional language is love and connection and sort of compassion and excitement and passion. And in terms of the thought process of it, it's all dreaming what I want to happen. It's beautiful. But then this other journey, it's survival. And the survival state's language is everything else. It's can't, never this. It's always this. It shouldn't be this. It should be this. It's good, it's bad, it's right, it's wrong, it's black and white. The emotion is fear and anxiety and anger and frustration. And the thought process is what I don't want to happen in my life. Constant negative avoidance. Right. I don't want that. I don't want that. I must do this. And those two journeys, what I want, moving towards what I want and moving away from what I don't, they don't end up in the same place. They're not even on the same plane. They're in different universes. One of them, it's not even a life for me compared to the opportunity now. And most people say, oh, well, it must be difficult now because you used to be spoken about and everyone used to watch you play, and now you're older and and you do this. But I look and say, but I'm not older. I'm not anything. I don't have that past. I don't have a future. I'm me, and I have now. The same way that when I was playing, if you're going to tell that story, I was me then, and I had that now. So what have I lost? Mm-hmm. It's only about. The now is always so full and infinite. It's never holding anything back.
Yeah.
But it's me, how I turn up, that decides this experience of life. And so what have I lost? I've still got a now. If I've still got a now and I've still got me, then it's all on. And I think that's why I can't see myself as a retired player or as a 43-year-old, even a man. When I properly go into this, I don't experience life necessarily on the deeper level as a man. You're touching life beyond that. When I'm playing rugby, I'm not thinking I'm a man playing rugby. It's just full engagement. And I think for me, that's, compared to where I was, these being I am now and the being I was then would find it very hard to even have a chat.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody talk about rugby in kind of a spiritual sense before. And that's kind of where you started this conversation with me. And I love just the absolute I am. And that's it, that you are what you are now in this moment. And then we were talking about enjoying life, enjoying where you are right now. When you and I did talk earlier, you were on holiday with your family. You're a dad now. What does your life look like now?
It's a good question. I coach in the sport I love. I coach individuals certain skills, and I play sport myself individually because it's still where I do all my revealing. It's my spiritual practice. So I take a basketball, I go and spend half an hour shooting basketballs, and I turn it inwards. It's all through subtle sensitivity and internal environment. And I do that with players in rugby. And my work outside of that specific place is in mental, physical, emotional health, and looking at the same thing. And then my life always is about my family and about exploring that. But when you say, what's my life look like now? It's just exactly what we were talking about. It's exploring me, which means I'm at the same time always exploring this moment and life. I can't, for the same energy that was in my rugby, the same intensity is still in this. So I can't stop. I don't stop for a minute and catch myself, or let myself have that kind of, oh, that person over there, they're such an idiot. I'm like, I can't have that. If that thought comes up, I find myself just going, how interesting that I would say that. It's in me.
Yeah.
Why do I have this idea to frame someone else when I know nothing about them? And suddenly that's meant that every moment has been an amazing opportunity. And I look at life through that lens. And as a result, I feel like I'm very busy. I'm busy, but I'm busy doing something I love doing. So I feel like I'm living a full life. I'm busy doing what I love doing, whether it's a podcast, whether it's traveling on the train, whether it's kicking with rugby players, whether it's being with my family. It's all the same thing. It's just another opportunity to connect deeper to people and to engage more fully in your loves and what you are, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and while you were talking, especially while you were describing that 2003 World Cup game, I was picturing like Michael Jordan in Utah when he had the stomach flu and he played that, playoff game, and Kobe when he was on bags of IVs going back and forth from Colorado and playing sick with the flu. And, just all these people, not just athletes, but you think about like actors and singers and people that are in the public eye at the top of their game, as it were. And then there's just got to be, I feel like there's not enough discussed about what you're talking about. Like if that's it, then what happens afterward? And does that have to be like, is that our society that points people toward those? Because those are, I mean, Kobe and Michael Jordan for sure were perfectionists, 100%, right? They demanded the best from themselves. It reminded me a lot of what you were talking about, like the practicing when nobody else was practicing, always focused on it, driving toward that goal. But and this may be a two-part question for you, but I know that on your podcast, I Am with Jonny Wilkinson, you talk to people about their own transformations. And is that something that comes up for you then? I've listened to a few, so I kind of know the answer, but do you talk to people who felt like they were at the top of their game and then there's this letdown and an opportunity for transformation, and how does that work?
Yeah, it's about human potential, and it's about different dimensions of experience that are available, not necessarily through work, but actually here and now, it all being available here and now, that we can exist on so many different levels. So much depth is available, but it's up to us to I guess access that depth. And the societal thing you're mentioning, the surface level physical comparison, competition stuff, which I'm talking about, being my wish when I started playing rugby was I want to be the best in the world. As I kind of grew out of that one, I went, I want to be the best I can be. And all the time I kept finding the limits in it. So then it was, I want to just be all I can be. And then I was like, oh, stop. I just want to be. And now I'm there. That's it. I just want to be. I just want to be. Because in finding that deeper level of everything, you include all the levels within it. But when you go to that surface societal level and you gamble on it and you put all your worth and identity in that level, you don't include the levels underneath it, the bigger levels. You don't get to communicate with the higher stuff, the stuff that really surprises you. In that surface level of competition, comparison, even things like love and humility, they're not available. So I think the podcast is about finding out how people have in their lives experienced and found that kind of I guess that growth or that transcendence into those deeper levels, but also uncovering if they have that connection to how, because that's always the big question. How and people's different views on it, particularly from the spiritual tradition, people through suffering, people through deep understandings, people through alternative therapies, people through triggering events or people they've met, whatever it be. But the how is the key part, because it has to be something that goes against the present system of logic. And the present system of logic for me, and this is probably where it all lies for me, is that old me has these old feelings, and when they come up, and these old thought patterns, and when they come up for years and years, that old me held or enslaved this now me, and this now me is capable of anything. But the old me that was already out of date had its hands in me. And so I started being recruited by that old feeling. I feel fearful, so I go off running after it. I get old thought patterns, so I feel terrible, and I try and solve them. And the answer simply was to, when those old feelings came up, or come up, as they still do, obviously, and thought patterns, is to sit in them and allow them. It's the one thing we never do. So meditation, acceptance, gratitude, love, compassion, just silence, whatever it is, it's just that practice of saying yes to it, but not trying to solve it. I spent my life solving that feeling. Oh my God, I feel so fearful. I feel so unstable and unworthy. I need to solve it. So I went to the far end of sport and broke my body and got nowhere.
Right.
And so I went to the far end of trying to become someone and earn and have respect and recognition. And it did nothing. But to sit in it, and to sit in the unknown without the guarantees and all that vulnerability, and just to sit and rep that the same way you rep your bench press in the gym, or and just to say and trust the same that we give to all these other endeavors in life, we can give to that endeavor. And it's the only thing that's broken that cycle, is to do something which doesn't serve that cycle. It doesn't answer it, and that for me is, as a perfectionist, as a savior, as a warrior, I always had to answer the question. But now I sit in the question.
Right.
And it takes humility to do that, because you don't get the answer. You have to wait for the answer to come from higher. And I think that for me has always been, will always be the practical part where I'll say that's the change, I think.
Yeah. Do you think that 23 or 24-year-old Jonny could have heard I Am with Jonny Wilkinson and applied some of what he learned in that podcast to his life?
I like to think that if that Jonny was able to train with me one-on-one, yes, it's harder when you're talking to someone on a podcast. But for me,
sure,
I know I would have at least found some traction with him, because I know he was after his best, and I could have brought him at least to questions that would have at least revealed some gross hypocrisy in saying, I want to be my best, but I also want to keep doing this. And you're saying, well, hold on, you're at odds with yourself. And I don't think I'd have been able to walk away from that, because I wanted to be my best that much that I would have had to at some point say, in which case something has to give. If I'm true about wanting to find out my best, fear, stress, anger, frustration, perfectionism, they have to be completely let go of, or at least completely redefined. And I think it would have taken some courage for me to give up what I thought was a guarantee. But what I've come to learn is that when you explore your self-worth and you start to move towards your self-worth, your performance, your relationships, and everything look after themselves. I know this because when I was on the field, I found the level of play that I found, not because I trained well and played well so much, but because on the field, I felt worthy. That's why I did what I did. It wasn't because of all the hours of practice. The reason my body broke down was because of all the hours of practice. But the reason I was able to do what I did on the field was because I felt worthy and deserving of it. And so my goal has been now is to be like, to do anything that uncovers more and more of my worth and deserving, no matter what comes up in me.
Well, and you are really in a unique position to dispense your experience to people because you were at the pinnacle and you are, you were whole, you were happy, you were in, like I said, you have a family, you're enjoying your life. You're not, in a dark room by yourself with this very small life. And so you, perhaps, I like that idea that maybe if you at this age had come in, alongside your brother when you were killing yourself trying to get ready to go back on the field after you had won that 2003 World Cup, maybe someone with that experience, along with someone who loved you, could have said, look at it this way, or here's some questions I want you to ask yourself, like you said, and then, let them come to the conclusion. But there's something really unique about someone who has that experience. And so I'm so glad that not only are you training people one-on-one, but that you are doing your podcast, because you might be able to affect change, like real change within people, before it gets too dark.
I think that's the goal, but there's one really, really key factor that I think would have helped with that conversation between me now and the younger Jonny. And that is, I'm not free of it. I haven't conquered it. I still end up in that dark room. I still suffer like mad, but I have a different relationship with my suffering. And that's the bit that I think also, I hope, has that capacity to affect change, is that I'm not leading or guiding people. I'm collaborating with them to saying, I'm there too. This is what I'm finding out. And I can still speak from a place of darkness. Only a year and a half ago, out the blue, I had another 9 months of just pure hell. And I thought, geez, I'm in such a great space. Out the blue, I'm doing things. I'm looking at myself being like, this is humiliation. To someone who was starting to feel like, oh, I know how this works. And I'm in that space again. But it's beautiful, because I think my goal is to connect with people. And this is part of the path. It's never a wrong turn. And so having that, the both ends of the sort of spectrum, or at least, higher and lower ends of the feeling spectrum, having success, having failure, but also still being in the thick of it, I think hopefully allows me to still have some relevance to what anyone else and everything else is going through. But at the same time, the answer for me is all humility. When I do meet people and speak to them, I always feel like I'm getting more from them than I could possibly be giving. And I think I'm aware of the fact that I'm privileged, because people I meet who think I'm helping them, I'm like, geez, if only you knew this is a mutual serving in every way.
Wow. Well, Jonny, thank you so much. For everyone who's listening, this is on YouTube, so please go to YouTube and watch the interview. If you just listened to it this time, very handsome guy we're talking to. And two, every way that you can reach Jonny or find out more about him will be in the show notes of this episode. So just go to the show notes and you can click on any of those links. And Jonny, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this conversation.
Not at all. My absolute pleasure. And thanks to yourself and your team. You have an incredible setup here, and very, very cool. And also to anyone listening, wishing everyone incredibly well. Hi, I'm Jonny Wilkinson, and I am the only one in the room whose biggest win led to darkness.